20-something years.
That's a good plateau to talk about because a lot of young chefs, that happens to them all the fucking time. Literally every time they have a bad service, they go home and question their whole existence.
Yes, and that's sort of like where you're... And I think there's part of that process that's healthy.
Oh, for sure.
But then there's also part of that where you're just like, dude, man, you've been doing this for a year and a half. Like, you're not... Like, you got to give it some time.
Give it some time,
You don't have the muscle memory built in. You don't have the technical skills yet. You don't have all these things, like a little bit of, just because we're talking about these really heavy, physically, mentally, emotionally challenging things, every time you don't get what you want or the world pushes back on you just a little bit, doesn't mean that is like, so intense. Every time you don't get what you want or you don't feel the way you want, that can also just be work and something that you have to work through, right? Like, we can't be so adverse to adversity that we're like,
it's growing pains.
That we're just afraid to put the work in, right? Yeah. And I'm certainly not like advocating for that like boot camp style, intensive, abusive or anything like that. But on the flip side, we can't be afraid to get to work, and we can't be afraid of adversity because that's what hones and forges us and makes us stronger. And if we lived in a world, like, how would you develop? Like, we go back to like the creative process, right? And just becoming our better selves. Like, all of these things come out of these, even adversities that you put on yourself. They come out of these situations where you have to kind of check yourself or feel like, wow, like, shit, I fucked that up, man.
Yeah.
I got to do that better, right? And like, you need those. You just need those things. And I hope that we can learn as everything changes and everyone changes, that people can like handle adversity without giving up, and like, at least, and if you want to change directions, change careers, change mindsets, lifestyles, that's the beauty of this life and world, is that you can do that and you're empowered to do that, right? But also, if you really think you want to try something, whether it's cooking or serving or carpentry or music or whatever that thing is, like, don't be afraid to work at it.
Exactly.
Either, and don't give up on that after that little bit or big bits of adversity.
It's like, trying to learn guitar, going to one lesson and being like, I didn't get it.
Yeah, like, it's just not for me, man. Like, I just can't do. My hands don't bend that way.
Exactly. You're like, I just can't do it. And I think that when you're growing, part of it is you telling yourself, you're wrong.
Yeah.
I can do this.
I can do this.
I can do this. Part of when I talked to Jason McKinney on one of the episodes, he talks about kind of talking with yourself and how to do that successfully. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes you do have to like sit yourself down and be like, you were wrong to say that you couldn't do the thing. Mm-hmm. You just didn't work hard at it. Mm-hmm. And just because you failed the first time doesn't mean, just like all the greats have the stories of people being homeless that are now millionaires, or Michael Jordan getting cut from his team and now he's the best. It's like, so the human mind is a powerful thing. And I think we're seeing now more than ever. And that's, I think, the beauty of social media, is that everything's out there. When these huge triumphs that people have overcome 20, 30 years in the making, that back in 1992, whoever was going through these struggles didn't fucking think at all that anybody would know what the hell's going on, But I don't think back in 1992 they were putting Gorilla Glue in their hair. Have you seen that shit?
No.
There's some chick put fucking Gorilla Glue in her hair, and like she's been in the hospital for days. They've been like washing it out of her scalp.
Was that a TikTok video?
That was, I think she tried to make a video, like, those hair videos? She, like, tried to make a whatever styling video, and she's like, check it out, like, my hair hasn't moved in a couple days, and she used Gorilla Glue. And then now it's, like, all over the news. She's got a GoFundMe. She's been in the hospital for days getting her fucking hair torn off of her head. But, humans, they learn from others' mistake as well. That's the lesson there. You know what I mean?
That's something that...
Read the labels, guys. Read the fucking labels. Jesus. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I ordered mustard oil this past year from Amazon because when we came back to being open, everybody had started to home cook, home bake. Like, flour was hard to find, sugar was low, yeast was low, and you're like, what the fuck is happening? And I forgot where the fuck I was going with that story. Jesus Christ.
Mustard oil. So, I think that edible's starting to hit. So the mustard oil, I get it. And I'm like, oh, great, we got mustard oil. We can make mustard vinaigrette. We're good. And I look at the label. It's like only for hair and skin. And I'm like, what the fuck? So, what did I do? I put it in a shot glass. I drank a little bit of it. And then let me wait a day and see if I die. I didn't die. But then I was still like, I can't do it. I can't. No. Because, somebody's going to get sick. And it's like, that's the last thing you want. The worst thing, I think, is for you to make a mistake and to find out years later that you made a mistake. And be like, oh yeah, remember that time you came and cooked Thanksgiving dinner for us? We all got sick. Nobody told you because they felt bad. That kind of shit, I never lived that, but I'm sure somebody has, and it's rough. But so you're in Rhode Island. Let's get back to your life here. Yeah, go for it.
You're in Rhode Island. You're growing up. When did you first kind of get interested in food?
For me, when I look back, when I was younger, it didn't seem like it was anything in particularly important to me. But when I look back now, it was always important to me, right?
Yeah.
When I was able to, later on in my life, even in my teens, and when I decided to do this for a career, I look back and I'm like, no, this has been with you.
You see the signs.
From you just didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
But I'm the youngest of 5, and my mom is one of 7. And we lived close to my grandparents, and so many of my fond memories as a child were revolved around the kitchen, around the dinner table, revolved around these social gatherings, Sunday suppers at Grandpa's house, where he would have all his kids and they would have all their kids, and it was just these crazy experiences. And I wasn't thinking about the food, but the food was what brought everybody there.
Yeah.
And when I look back, right, it was the meal and the dinner table, right, that just created that feeling. And as I got, a little bit older, I remember just loving, I love the way that tastes, the way Grandpa makes this, or I love the way Mom makes this.
What kind of food we talking here?
It was never anything super special. So my background is Irish, French, and Sicilian, which is a whole other crazy story. But we grew up very much like my grandfather. My grandfather's family on my mom's side came down from Quebec, Montreal, and my grandmother on my dad's side also, my meme, and so there's French Canadian on both sides. So that definitely, whether they knew it at the time, but they were cooking what their parents had cooked for them and so forth and so on. So I got a lot of that influence in my family meals, but also my grandmother, very, very Irish. There was a lot of sense of those sensibilities that, again, I only saw later in life. Maybe that's where that came from.
Yeah.
But my grandfather used to do cream chicken. He used to make these whole chickens and this awesome just black pepper and milk sauce over mashed potatoes, or we were constantly having gravies or sauces over which I know now was old bread and things like that. Yeah. Or but we also a lot of he would make sausage and peppers a lot when I was a kid. Eggplant parmesan in the summertime when eggplants were around. Things, they were. It was a diverse group of foods, but there were certainly the roasts, ham dinners, like things like, and it's simple stuff. It wasn't complicated, but it just always tasted so good.
It sounds like it's a little seasonal.
Yeah.
You said when
there were
ready,
there were definitely some, some elements, and I'm sure that changed as time went by because of how accessible everything got. Yeah. But still, their thought process and their patterns were sort of developed before those abilities came out. So they're thinking about things, or they had gardens, or they grew up when there was gardens. So when the weather was a certain way, they kind of wanted a certain thing, and and my mom was she still is a great cook. And when I was a kid, there was 5 of us, and my dad was working his ass off, and my mom was raising us, and we were, she would just cooking. It was like she was cooking for an army every day, 3 meals a day for 7 people. She used to bake bread when I was younger before she started going to work, and those things just really stuck with me. And plus, I had 3 teenage sisters that were like I was constantly hiding from, and I would just go hang out with my mom in the kitchen, or like when I was real little, I would just play under the kitchen table. Yeah. And the sights, the smells, the hum, the buzz in there. And then I just, actually one of the first meals that I physically started cooking, my dad he worked so much when I was a kid, and he 2-3 jobs. And, but on Sundays, sometimes he would make breakfast, and he taught me how to make home fries, and he taught me how to make we call them flapjacks growing up, which I later found out were crepes, but that's what that's what they called them when he was growing up. And he would make crepes, or my mom would make crepes, and we'd have flapjacks, and there'd be on a Sunday morning, there'd be 7 of us, 5 kids, all around this table and they got 2 pans going, and they're just, making one, throwing it on one, and you'd have to go in order, and you'd be waiting for yours to come around.
That's the best.
And it was just like hot pancakes. It was so cool. And I didn't know it was happening, but then as life got harder, my parents, ended up getting divorced, and, you're as a teenager, and you're going through all the teenage things and emotions, and the world was, my brother was getting,
what year was
deployed this? To this is early 90s, mid-early 90s. My brother was getting deployed to the Gulf, and all these crazy emotions and things going on, and you just you get in that teenage headspace and weird, and you start to look for your your blankie, your comfort, what are you things that make you feel good, and also just out of a need again, my mom was working now, and so I'd be have to fend for myself after school, or and I'd start I'm just gonna make myself some whatever, when I started off heating up leftovers, or then just making myself breakfast, and I then sometimes one of my buddies who's really funny told this story on air. He was back in college, he was a DJ on for BRU, and I had lost touch with him for a few years, and he was telling this, and then I didn't even know he was a DJ on this radio station, and I'm driving to work, and I used to listen to BRU all the time, and I hear this story, and about my buddy was little, he used to make Jiffy muffins, and he was telling this crazy story about, and I'm like, is that Matt? Is that Matt? And I call the radio station, and it was my buddy was telling this funny story about how his buddy was cooking when we were kids, and I'm laughing, and I'm like, God, yeah, I guess hearing it from somebody else, I'm I guess I just, I'm hey, and I we were playing, and I'd be let's go make some muffins or cookies, or I was cooking when I was a young kid, and and I'm not to say that I'm not the only person that would do that, but like it was just something that I liked to do, you know, and it was something that made me happy, and I wanted to eat, and